A Russian military serviceman driving a car on a road where a large number of military equipment had been destroyed in Russia's Kursk region has become the target of a Ukrainian drone. The Russian serviceman described as a machinery graveyard the road where various armored combat vehicles, including North Korean-made military vehicles, UAZs, quadricycles, motorcycles, pickup trucks and other military equipment were destroyed by artillery and drone strikes. Then, the Russian soldier himself became the target of a kamikaze drone strike and is unable to continue his journey after being targeted by the drone.
Баги, ну тогда вот корейцы тут, квадрики, бля, что-то такое, мотоциклы, пикапы, охереть вообще, на колеса ставить, блядь.
If US President Donald Trump develops the policy of "this is not our war, it is far beyond the ocean," and "do as you wish," this will be a serious change in the nature of the war. As Russian political scientist and political philosopher Alexander Morozov is convinced, such actions by the US could untie Putin's hands. It is quite possible, according to the expert, that in this case, by the end of 2025, we will indeed see French and Swedish special forces fighting in Ukraine, not as individual volunteers, but as full-fledged units. This is exactly what the situation could lead to if Trump does not show consistency, Morozov believes. Secondly, Trump in this case will not only abandon Europe, but will also clearly demonstrate his weakness to the entire world, showing that the United States is incapable of influencing anything and cannot support international norms. This will be the worst-case scenario that has been talked about a lot lately. If the United States simply leaves the international arena and refuses to perceive the war as unprovoked aggression by a large state against a small one, then they will untie everyone's hands. In fact, this will mean a signal. Act as you wish, the expert says in a conversation with Glavred. As Morozov argues, this is an extremely dangerous situation that may not lead to World War III, but will certainly open Pandora's box. Even during the Russian-Ukraine war, most global players refrained from escalating violence. Iran restrained itself more than ever despite the crisis in the Middle East. The Gulf states, including Saudi Arabia, as well as China and the largest economies of Asia, also refrained from taking active action. They all stood still, the expert recalls. Such a scenario, according to Morozov, will mark the beginning of a new era of global power politics. But what happens if it becomes clear that America is not only isolating itself economically, but is also changing itself politically and refusing to be part of a global alliance to maintain international order? That would certainly be a disaster. At the same time, a serviceman of the armed forces of Ukraine, political scientist Kirill Sazonov, expressed the opinion that Russia will have to be forced to peace by the forces of the USA, Ukraine and Europe. By the way, the head of the Kremlin, Vladimir Putin, when asked how he assessed the US proposal for a ceasefire, stated that he agreed to a cessation of hostilities, but only on the condition that it would contribute to long-term peace. Ukrainian military expert Ole Katkov explained that the only effective mechanism to bring Russia to the negotiating table and ensure compliance with a ceasefire is the threat of force against them. He shared his opinions with Espresso TV. There are no mechanisms to bring Putin to the negotiating table other than the threat of force. Since 2014, the Kremlin has repeatedly shown that any agreements with it are purely ephemeral. Whether such agreements will be honored always depends on whether there is a stick that can punish them for violations. Therefore, I objectively hope that there is some mechanism to influence Russia in case they violate ceasefire agreements again. And we understand that all of this depends on the United States, because even any European initiatives are tied to US actions, Katkov said. The expert emphasized that the US must understand that Russia can violate the ceasefire at any moment and blame Ukraine for it. If the US presents an alternative saying that Russia must agree to a comprehensive ceasefire and adhere to it, and that any violation will result in even greater consequences, that could work. Because we understand that if such a ceasefire is established, there will be no peacekeepers or half-blind international organizations involved. This would be a ceasefire with guarantees from both sides not to violate it. However, Russia is already talking about certain guarantees, and soon the same old narrative will begin, that they are not responsible and everyone is against them. The key question in this situation remains whether the US is ready to recognize this and maintain control over the process, he added. Recall on March the 11th, a meeting between the Ukrainian and American delegations took place in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. As a result, Kiev agreed to a 30-day ceasefire with Russia, while the US committed to resuming intelligence sharing and security assistance. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio expressed hope after the US-Ukraine negotiations that Russia would agree to a temporary ceasefire. Meanwhile, White House National Security Advisor Mike Waltz announced that President Donald Trump had decided to immediately lift the pause on military aid to Ukraine following the talks. Trump also expressed hope that Russia would agree to a one-month ceasefire in Ukraine. EU's High Representative Kaja Kallas issued a statement in which the EU welcomed the joint decision of Ukraine and the United States following the negotiations and expressed readiness to fully participate in steps toward achieving peace. Head of the Ukrainian Presidential Office, Andriy Yermak, stated that discussions on the details of the ceasefire in Ukraine would begin next week. On March the 12th, Reuters, citing sources, reported that Russian sources reacted cautiously to the US proposal for a 30-day ceasefire, which Ukraine had supported.